Mayday! Mayday! This is Falcon Two-Seven, experiencing complete hydraulic failure at Angels 15. The desperate voice crackles through the static-filled radio transmission, cutting through the routine chatter at Nellis Air Force Base like a knife through silk. In the control tower, seasoned flight controllers freeze as they process the words every air traffic professional dreads hearing. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Captain Jake Morrison's F-22 Raptor, one of the most advanced fighter jets ever built, has become a death trap 30,000 feet above the Nevada desert. His aircraft's primary flight controls are failing systematically, turning the sleek Predator into an uncontrollable projectile hurtling through the sky. The situation is beyond critical. It's a countdown to catastrophe. Standing in the corner of the bustling control room, completely unnoticed by the frantic personnel scrambling to coordinate rescue efforts, is Elena Rodriguez. To everyone around her, she's nothing more than a quiet woman in civilian clothes, clipboard in hand, methodically reviewing maintenance schedules with the focused attention of someone whose job requires precision but not brilliance. Her presence in the control tower is purely administrative. She's here to coordinate routine equipment inspections and ensure that the complex scheduling of aircraft maintenance doesn't interfere with flight operations. But as Captain Morrison's panicked transmissions fill the air, something shifts in Elena's posture. Her grip tightens imperceptibly on her clipboard, and her eyes that usually remain downcast and focused on paperwork, lift to track the radar blip representing the dying aircraft. Those who know her might notice the slight change in her breathing, the way her shoulders straighten just enough to suggest familiarity with crisis situations. But in the chaos of the emergency unfolding, no one is paying attention to the maintenance coordinator. Colonel Richard Hayes, the base's current air operations commander, assumes control of the situation with the kind of bluster that often masks uncertainty. His voice booms across the control room as he issues rapid-fire orders that sound authoritative but lack the precision that emergency situations demand. Get me a visual on that aircraft. Scramble the rescue birds. Contact Peterson Air Force Base for backup support. Each command carries the weight of authority but reveals, to those with trained ears, a fundamental misunderstanding of the tactical situation developing above them. The radar screen shows Captain Morrison's F-22 in an erratic flight pattern, the aircraft's movements becoming increasingly unpredictable as its pilot struggles to maintain control with backup systems that were never designed to handle the complete failure of primary flight controls. Air traffic controllers relay information with professional calm that barely masks their growing alarm. The mathematics of the situation are brutal and unforgiving. Without hydraulic control, the Raptor has perhaps minutes before it becomes impossible to control, and the ejection system's effectiveness diminishes rapidly as the aircraft's attitude becomes more unstable. Elena remains perfectly still, her eyes never leaving the radar display, her mind automatically calculating angles, altitudes, and approach vectors with a fluency that would surprise anyone who noticed. But her civilian status, her quiet demeanor, and her position as merely another support contractor render her effectively invisible in a room full of uniformed personnel trained to look to rank and authority for guidance in crisis situations. Colonel Hayes' commands grow more frantic as the gravity of the situation becomes apparent. His training, adequate for routine operations and peacetime scenarios, proves insufficient for the split-second decision-making required when a pilot's life hangs in the balance. His orders conflict with each other, sending ground crews in multiple directions without clear priorities, creating the kind of organized chaos that turns manageable emergencies into preventable tragedies. The radio crackles again with Captain Morrison's voice, now carrying an edge of controlled panic that experienced pilots recognize as the sound of a man calculating his own mortality. Control, I'm losing altitude control. Backup systems are failing. I need guidance for emergency approach procedures. This thing isn't responding like anything I've trained for. The professional composure in his voice cannot hide the reality that he's flying a machine that has become alien to him, its behavior now governed by physics and mechanical failure, rather than the precise engineering that makes the F-22 one of the most controllable aircraft ever built. Elena's hands begin to move almost without conscious thought, her fingers tracing calculations on her clipboard that have nothing to do with maintenance schedules and everything to do with the fluid dynamics of a failing aircraft fighting gravity above the desert. Her breathing remains steady, But those who know the signs might recognize the subtle shift in her demeanor, the way her civilian contractor persona begins to fall away like a discarded costume, revealing something harder and more competent beneath. The control room erupts in overlapping voices as different personnel attempt to contribute to the solution. Weather reports, fuel calculations, airfield conditions, and emergency protocols blend into a cacophony of information that threatens to overwhelm rather than clarify the tactical picture. Colonel Hayes struggles to synthesize the input, his commands becoming more hesitant as the complexity of the situation exceeds his experience level. Through her peripheral vision, Elena watches the organized confusion with the kind of calm assessment that comes from having lived through similar moments when lives depended on clear thinking and decisive action. She sees the gaps in the emergency response, the missed opportunities for coordination, the small failures of communication that accumulate into larger problems. Her clipboard trembles slightly in her hands, not from fear, but from the enormous effort required to remain silent when everything in her training and experience screams at her to take control. Captain Morrison's latest transmission carries a new note of desperation. Control, I'm at 12,000 feet and descending. Whatever we're going to do, we need to do it now. This aircraft is not going to stay airborne much longer. The stark honesty in his words cuts through the control room chatter like a blade, creating a moment of silence in which the weight of impending disaster settles on everyone present. Elena closes her eyes for just a moment, and in that brief pause, those closest to her might notice the transformation beginning, the straightening of her spine, the subtle shift in her stance from civilian observer to something else entirely. When she opens her eyes again, they carry a different quality, a kind of focused intensity that suggests depths of experience and capability that her maintenance coordinator role has kept carefully hidden. The moment of truth approaches as Captain Morrison's F-22 continues its unstable descent toward the unforgiving Nevada landscape, while in the control room below, a woman who is supposed to remain silent prepares to break her carefully maintained cover to save a pilot's life, regardless of the personal consequences that revelation might bring. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Elena Rodriguez lives in a world of calculated invisibility, where blending into the background has become an art form perfected through years of deliberate practice. Her single-bedroom apartment in the base housing complex sits at the end of a quiet street, distinguished only by its complete lack of distinguishing features. The walls remain painted in standard military beige, decorated with nothing more personal than a single landscape photograph of the Colorado Rockies, a generic scene that reveals nothing about the woman who chose it. Every morning at precisely 5:47 a.m., Elena's alarm sounds with the same soft electronic chime that has marked the beginning of her days for the past 4 years. She rises without the jarring transition that affects most people, moving from sleep to wakefulness with the smooth efficiency of someone whose internal clock has been trained by years of military precision, though none of her neighbors would recognize this trait for what it truly represents. Her morning routine unfolds with meticulous consistency. Coffee brewed to the exact same strength, prepared in a simple white mug that matches the deliberately unremarkable kitchen setup she maintains. Toast with peanut butter, cut diagonally not from preference but from habit, a small detail that speaks to muscle memory developed in circumstances far removed from civilian life. She dresses in the same style of civilian clothes that have become her uniform, practical slacks, modest blouses in neutral colors, and comfortable shoes that make no sound as she moves through her daily responsibilities. The drive to work takes her through the main gate in a faded blue Honda Civic that draws no attention from the security personnel who have processed her entry thousands of times. To them, she represents the epitome of routine, another civilian contractor whose presence is necessary but unremarkable, part of the background machinery that keeps military operations functioning smoothly. Her security badge identifies her as Elena Rodriguez, Maintenance Coordination Specialist, Level 2, a title that encompasses enough responsibility to justify her presence in sensitive areas, while suggesting limitations on her actual authority or expertise. At Nellis Air Force Base, Elena's office occupies a corner of the administrative complex that handles the unglamorous but essential work of keeping America's most advanced aircraft operational. Her workspace reflects the same studied anonymity as her living quarters: a standard issue desk, computer monitor, filing cabinets filled with maintenance schedules, parts inventories, and inspection reports. The only personal touch visible to casual observers is a small succulent plant that requires minimal care, chosen specifically because it thrives on neglect rather than attention. Her colleagues in the maintenance coordination department know Elena as someone who arrives early, stays late when necessary, and handles her responsibilities with quiet competence that never quite rises to the level that would attract notice from senior leadership. Janet Williams, the department supervisor, appreciates Elena's reliability, but would struggle to provide more than basic biographical information about her if asked. She does good work, keeps to herself, never causes problems, represents the extent of most people's knowledge about Elena Rodriguez. The carefully constructed persona extends to every aspect of her professional interactions. During staff meetings, Elena occupies the same seat in the back corner, taking notes with the focused attention of someone whose job requires precise record-keeping. She speaks only when directly addressed, offering responses that demonstrate competence without revealing the depth of knowledge that lies beneath the surface. Her suggestions for improving maintenance schedules or coordinating complex inspections carry the practical wisdom of experience, but she frames them as common-sense observations rather than insights born from specialized expertise. Base personnel who interact with Elena regularly have developed unconscious assumptions about her background and capabilities. Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson, who coordinates with Elena on aircraft scheduling, sees her as a former civilian aviation worker who transitioned to military contracting for better job security. Lieutenant Sarah Kim, who handles parts procurement, assumes Elena's methodical approach to paperwork stems from previous experience in corporate logistics. These assumptions remain unchallenged because Elena never corrects them, never volunteers information that would complicate the carefully constructed narrative of her ordinary professional background. Yet subtle details occasionally surface that would perplex those who paid closer attention. Elena's handwriting, when she completes forms manually, displays the precise block lettering taught to military personnel for official documentation. Her posture, while walking across the base, demonstrates the unconscious bearing of someone trained to move with purpose and authority, though she deliberately slouches her shoulders to minimize this natural characteristic. When aircraft pass overhead during their daily operations, Elena's eyes track their movements with the automatic precision of someone who understands flight dynamics and tactical procedures, but she quickly redirects her attention to avoid drawing notice. The break room conversations reveal Elena's mastery of social camouflage. She contributes to discussions about television shows she never watches, local restaurants she rarely visits, and weekend activities that fill the social calendars of people whose lives remain uncomplicated by hidden purposes. Her colleagues appreciate her pleasant but unremarkable presence, finding her easy to work with precisely because she never challenges their preconceptions or demands attention for her own opinions or experiences. Hochläser. Elena's lunch routine exemplifies her commitment to maintaining her cover. She sits at different tables each day in the base cafeteria, rotating her location to avoid the kind of regular social connections that might lead to deeper friendships or more probing questions about her personal history. She listens more than she speaks, offering appropriate responses to the workplace gossip and casual complaints that form the backbone of military-based social interaction. Her contributions to these conversations demonstrate enough personality to seem normal, while revealing nothing substantial about her true background or capabilities. The complexity of Elena's deception becomes apparent in the small moments when her training briefly surfaces before being quickly suppressed. When a new maintenance technician struggles with aircraft specifications during a briefing, Elena's mouth opens slightly as if to offer guidance before she catches herself and returns to silent observation. When emergency vehicles race across the flight line responding to routine incidents, her head turns with the automatic attention of someone trained to assess tactical situations, but she immediately refocuses on her paperwork to avoid drawing attention to her reaction. Her relationship with technology provides another layer of her carefully constructed persona. Elena uses a basic smartphone, eschewing the advanced devices that might suggest interests or capabilities beyond her stated role. Her computer skills appear adequate for her job requirements, without revealing the sophisticated technical knowledge that her true background would suggest. She demonstrates familiarity with military scheduling software while avoiding any indication that she understands the tactical implications of the flight operations she helps coordinate. The most challenging aspect of Elena's daily performance involves interactions with uniformed personnel who possess the experience to potentially recognize inconsistencies in her civilian contractor facade. She has developed techniques for managing these encounters, asking questions that suggest appropriate ignorance about military procedures, expressing minor confusion about terminology that would be second nature to someone with her actual background, and demonstrating the kind of respectful deference that civilian contractors typically show to military authority. This carefully maintained identity serves Elena's purposes perfectly, allowing her to remain close to the aviation environment that represents both her greatest professional passion and her deepest source of personal pain. Every day, she walks among the aircraft and personnel that formed the center of her previous life, serving them in ways they cannot understand while carrying the weight of secrets that grow heavier with each passing month of self-imposed exile from the world where she once belonged. 7 years ago, the name Lieutenant Colonel Elena Viper Rodriguez commanded respect in every fighter squadron, from Langley Air Force Base to Kadena Air Base in Japan. Her call sign wasn't chosen for intimidation or bravado, but for her legendary ability to strike with surgical precision when situations demanded split-second decisions that separated life from death in the unforgiving realm of air-to-air combat. At 28, Elena had become the youngest female pilot ever to command an F-22 Raptor squadron, leading the 94th Fighter Squadron hat in the ring through some of the most classified and dangerous missions in modern Air Force history. Her promotion came not through political maneuvering or diversity initiatives, but through a combination of raw talent, relentless dedication, and an almost supernatural ability to read aerial combat situations that left seasoned veterans shaking their heads in amazement. The path to that command had begun 12 years earlier at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, where Cadet Rodriguez distinguished herself not just through academic excellence, but through a natural understanding of flight dynamics that her instructors found remarkable. While other cadets struggled to master the theoretical aspects of aerodynamics and tactical aviation, Elena absorbed the concepts with an intuitive grasp that suggested she had been born to understand the relationship between aircraft and sky. Her training records from undergraduate pilot training at Shepherd Air Force Base read like a collection of superlatives. She completed the program finishing first in her class, with scores that exceeded previous records in both academic and flight performance categories. Her T6 Texan instructors noted her, quote, exceptional situational awareness and, quote, instinctive understanding of aircraft capabilities. When she transitioned to the T-38 Talon for advanced training, her abilities became even more apparent as she mastered formation flying, aerobatics, and tactical procedures with a fluency that typically required years to develop. The selection process for F-22 pilot training represented one of the most competitive programs in military aviation, with hundreds of qualified candidates competing for fewer than 30 positions each year. Elena's selection came not just from her outstanding training record, but from a psychological profile that identified her as possessing the rare combination of aggressive tactical instincts and calm analytical thinking required to operate the world's most advanced air superiority fighter. Luke Air Force Base in Arizona became Elena's proving ground as she learned to master the F-22 Raptor, an aircraft so sophisticated that many experienced pilots struggled to adapt to its capabilities. The Raptor demanded not just technical proficiency, but a fundamental shift in tactical thinking, as its stealth characteristics and advanced avionics allowed engagements at ranges and altitudes that redefined air-to-air combat. Elena adapted to these challenges with a natural ease that impressed even the most experienced instructors, demonstrating an ability to exploit the aircraft's advantages while instinctively understanding its limitations. Her first operational assignment with the 27th Fighter Squadron at Langley Air Force Base marked the beginning of a career trajectory that would establish her as one of the most capable combat pilots of her generation. The squadron, tasked with maintaining air superiority along the eastern seaboard and supporting rapid deployment operations worldwide, provided Elena with opportunities to develop the tactical expertise that would define her reputation. The classified missions that formed the core of Elena's operational experience remain buried in files that carry security classifications far above the level accessible to most military personnel. What can be revealed speaks to her involvement in operations spanning 3 continents, missions that required not just exceptional flying skills, but the kind of tactical brilliance that turns impossible situations into successful outcomes. Her mission reports, reviewed by Pentagon officials and Allied commanders, consistently demonstrated her ability to adapt to rapidly changing combat environments while maintaining the precision required for surgical strikes against high-value targets. Elena's promotion to flight commander came after a particularly classified operation in the Pacific Theater, where her tactical innovations allowed a four-ship formation of F-22s to neutralize a significantly larger enemy force without losing a single aircraft or pilot. The details of this engagement remain classified, but the commendations that followed spoke to her exceptional tactical leadership and innovative combat employment of advanced air-to-air tactics that became standard operating procedures for subsequent operations. The leadership qualities that distinguished Elena from other exceptional pilots became apparent during her tenure as flight commander. Unlike many combat pilots whose skills didn't translate to effective leadership, Elena demonstrated an intuitive understanding of how to develop other pilots' capabilities while maintaining the tactical excellence required for complex combat operations. Her training methods focused not just on technical proficiency, but on developing the kind of situational awareness and tactical thinking that allowed pilots to survive and succeed in environments where split-second decisions determine mission success or failure. Her squadron's performance under Elena's leadership established new standards for operational readiness and tactical effectiveness. Training exercises that had previously challenged experienced pilots became routine under her instruction methods, which emphasized understanding the principles behind tactical procedures rather than simply memorizing established protocols. She developed training scenarios that pushed pilots beyond their comfort zones while providing the safety margins necessary to learn from mistakes without catastrophic consequences. The innovation that marked Elena's approach to fighter tactics extended beyond traditional air-to-air combat to include her pioneering work in integrating F-22 capabilities with ground forces and naval operations. Her tactical concepts for close air support using stealth fighters created new possibilities for supporting troops in contact while maintaining the security provided by the Raptor's low observable characteristics. These innovations, tested during classified exercises and refined through operational experience, contributed to tactical doctrine that influenced fighter employment throughout the Air Force. Elena's reputation extended beyond her own squadron to the broader fighter community, where her tactical insights and training methods influenced pilot development programs at multiple bases. Young pilots sought assignment to her squadron not just for the prestigious aircraft, but for the opportunity to learn from someone whose tactical brilliance was matched by her ability to transfer knowledge effectively. Her mentorship produced a generation of fighter pilots who carried her tactical philosophy and training methods to squadrons throughout the Air Force. The international dimension of Elena's experience came through exchange programs and joint training exercises with allied air forces, where her tactical expertise and diplomatic skills helped strengthen relationships that enhanced American strategic interests. Her ability to work effectively with pilots from different cultural backgrounds while maintaining the tactical standards required for complex multinational operations made her a valuable asset for operations requiring international cooperation. Recognition of Elena's exceptional capabilities came through awards that represented the highest honors available to combat pilots. The Distinguished Flying Cross with 3 oak leaf clusters acknowledged her exceptional airmanship during combat operations. The Bronze Star Medal recognized her tactical leadership during ground support operations that saved American lives in contested environments. The Air Medal with multiple oak leaf clusters documented her sustained excellence during combat operations spanning multiple theaters. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from the pilots she trained and led, men and women who credited her guidance with their survival and success in subsequent operations. Their testimonials speak not just to her tactical brilliance, but to her ability to inspire excellence while maintaining the humanity that military service sometimes threatens to erode. Under Elena's leadership, being an exceptional pilot meant more than technical proficiency. It meant serving something greater than personal ambition or professional achievement. The mission briefing on that October morning 3 years ago began like countless others Elena had conducted throughout her distinguished career. The target package was classified at the highest levels, the enemy capabilities were significant but manageable, and her four-ship formation represented the pinnacle of American air power technology and training. What should have been a routine demonstration of American air superiority became the defining tragedy that would strip away everything Elena had worked to achieve and transform her from a celebrated commander into a woman haunted by choices that seemed right in the moment but carried consequences no tactical manual could have predicted. Operation Distant Thunder called for a precision strike against a heavily defended communications facility deep in hostile territory, a mission that required the unique capabilities of the F-22 Raptor to penetrate sophisticated air defense systems while maintaining the element of surprise essential for mission success. Elena's squadron had executed similar operations dozens of times, their success rate approaching perfection through a combination of superior technology, exceptional training, and tactical leadership that had earned recognition from the highest levels of military command. The formation that morning included 3 of Elena's most experienced pilots, men and women who had flown with her through multiple combat deployments, and developed the kind of professional trust that allows complex operations to unfold with minimal communication. Captain Michael "Shark" Thompson flew as her wingman, a position that required absolute precision and unwavering trust in formation discipline. Major Lisa "Ghost" Anderson commanded the second element, her call sign earned through an uncanny ability to appear and disappear from enemy radar screens with timing that seemed almost supernatural. Lieutenant Colonel David "Reaper" Martinez, Elena's most senior subordinate, rounded out the formation with experience that rivaled her own and tactical instincts honed through years of combat operations. The intelligence briefing had identified the target as a critical node in enemy communications networks, its destruction expected to disrupt coordination capabilities for weeks while providing valuable signals intelligence about enemy tactical procedures. The facility's location in a mountainous region complicated the approach routes, but provided natural masking that would allow the F-22s to penetrate undetected until the final attack phase. Enemy air defenses included surface-to-air missile systems with advanced tracking capabilities, but their positioning and operational patterns had been thoroughly analyzed through months of surveillance and electronic intelligence gathering. Elena's tactical plan exploited the Raptor's stealth characteristics and advanced electronic warfare capabilities to approach the target from an unexpected direction, using terrain masking and electronic countermeasures to avoid detection until the weapon's release phase. The plan included multiple contingencies for different threat reactions, escape routes that took advantage of the mountainous terrain, and coordination procedures that would allow the formation to adapt to changing tactical situations without compromising mission security or pilot safety. The penetration phase proceeded exactly as planned, with Elena's formation slipping through the enemy air defense network like ghosts, their radar signatures reduced to electronic whispers that registered as background noise on enemy detection systems. The landscape below them told the story of a region shaped by decades of conflict, where military installations blended seamlessly with civilian infrastructure in ways that complicated targeting decisions and required the kind of precision that only the most advanced weapons systems could provide. As they approached the target area, Elena's tactical display showed the communications facility exactly as intelligence had predicted, its antenna arrays and support buildings clearly visible through the advanced targeting systems that gave F-22 pilots unprecedented situational awareness. The defensive positions appeared normal, their radar emissions following patterns that matched previous surveillance data, suggesting that the approach had achieved complete tactical surprise. The weapon release sequence unfolded with mechanical precision, each pilot executing their assigned targeting responsibilities with the clinical efficiency that characterized successful combat operations. Elena watched her weapons track toward their designated impact points, the terminal guidance systems providing real-time feedback that confirmed the strikes would achieve the desired effects. For a moment that stretched into eternity, everything appeared to be proceeding exactly as planned. The explosion that followed exceeded all predictions and intelligence estimates, transforming what should have been a controlled demolition into a cataclysmic detonation that lit up the mountainous landscape like a miniature sun. Unknown to the intelligence analysts who had planned the operation, the communications facility housed not just the expected electronic equipment, but also served as a storage depot for chemical weapons that had been moved there during recent tactical repositioning. The interaction between Elena's precision-guided munitions and the stored chemical agents created a reaction that no one had anticipated or could have reasonably predicted. The blast wave that followed the initial explosion caught Captain Thompson's aircraft at the worst possible moment, just as he was beginning his post-strike turn to rejoin the formation. The concussion wave, combined with the thermal effects of the chemical reaction, created atmospheric conditions that overwhelmed his aircraft's flight control systems and caused immediate structural damage that made controlled flight impossible. Elena watched in horror as Shark's F-22 began an uncontrolled descent toward the mountainous terrain below, his radio transmissions cutting in and out as he fought desperately to regain control of his aircraft. Elena's immediate response demonstrated the tactical leadership that had defined her career, as she simultaneously coordinated search and rescue operations while managing the tactical situation to prevent further losses. She directed Ghost and Reaper to establish a defensive perimeter, while she attempted to provide direct assistance to Thompson's failing aircraft, using her own F-22's advanced sensors to assess his mechanical condition and provide guidance for emergency procedures. The 23 minutes that followed became the longest period of Elena's life, as she talked Captain Thompson through increasingly desperate attempts to stabilize his aircraft, while coordinating with rescue forces that were racing against time to reach the crash site. Her voice remained calm and professional throughout the ordeal, providing the kind of steady leadership that her training had prepared her to deliver, even in the most extreme circumstances. Thompson's responses grew increasingly labored as his aircraft's condition deteriorated, but his trust in Elena's guidance never wavered. The impact occurred at 14:37 local time, as Thompson's F-22 struck a mountainous ridge at high speed despite his heroic efforts to maintain control until the end. The explosion marked the end of a career that had been defined by exceptional skill and unwavering dedication to mission accomplishment. But it also marked the beginning of Elena's descent into a guilt that would consume everything she had worked to achieve. The investigation that followed cleared Elena of any tactical errors or procedural violations, concluding that the mission had been executed flawlessly according to all available intelligence and established protocols. The chemical weapons storage had not been detected through any of the intelligence-gathering methods available, and no reasonable commander could have predicted or prevented the chain of events that led to Thompson's death. The official report praised Elena's tactical leadership during the crisis and her coordination of rescue efforts under extremely difficult conditions. But Elena's internal investigation reached different conclusions, as she replayed every decision and tactical choice in search of alternatives that might have prevented the tragedy. She convinced herself that different approach routes, alternative timing, or modified weapon selection might have changed the outcome, despite analysis that proved such changes would have either compromised mission success or increased overall risk to the formation. The rational part of her mind understood the investigation's conclusions, but the emotional weight of losing someone under her command proved impossible to reconcile with continued military service. The resignation letter Elena submitted 6 months after the incident surprised everyone who knew her, as she walked away from a career trajectory that would have led to general officer rank and positions of increasing responsibility within the Air Force's senior leadership. She declined all attempts to change her mind, refused offers of alternative assignments, and quietly disappeared from the military aviation community that had defined her identity for 15 years. Colonel Richard Hayes arrived at Nellis Air Force Base 18 months ago, with a reputation that preceded him like a dark cloud, though the official records painted a carefully sanitized picture of his military career. His assignment as the base's air operations commander came not through merit or exceptional performance, but through a complex web of political connections and strategic reassignments designed to mask a pattern of leadership failures that had plagued his career for over a decade. Hayes's military service began with promise at the Air Force Academy, where his academic performance placed him in the middle of his class and his leadership potential appeared adequate for standard officer development. His early assignments as a second lieutenant showed competence in routine duties, but his personality traits that would later prove problematic were already beginning to manifest in subtle ways that his superiors either overlooked or attributed to the normal adjustment period that affects most junior officers. The first serious concerns about Hayes's leadership style emerged during his tenure as a flight commander at Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana, where his management of a missile maintenance squadron resulted in a series of incidents that raised questions about his decision-making capabilities. A critical safety inspection revealed procedural violations that Hayes had either failed to identify or chosen to ignore, leading to a formal reprimand that was quietly buried in his personnel file to avoid career-ending consequences. His promotion to major came on schedule despite these concerns, as the Air Force's personnel system often rewards time in service over demonstrated competence, particularly for officers whose political connections provide protection from the normal consequences of substandard performance. Hayes' assignment to Pentagon staff positions allowed him to distance himself from operational responsibilities while building relationships with senior officers whose influence would prove crucial to his continued advancement. The pattern of failures that would define Hayes' career crystallized during his command of a training squadron at Randolph Air Force Base in Texas, where his aggressive leadership style and tendency to blame subordinates for systemic problems created a toxic environment that drove several experienced instructors to request transfers. His approach to pilot training emphasized rigid adherence to procedures over adaptive thinking, producing graduates who could follow checklists but struggled with the kind of creative problem-solving that combat situations demand. A particularly damaging incident occurred during a routine training exercise when Hayes's micromanagement and contradictory orders led to a near collision between two T-38 aircraft that could have resulted in multiple fatalities. The investigation that followed identified Hayes's poor communication and failure to maintain situational awareness as contributing factors, but political pressure from his mentors ensured that the findings were classified and the incident was officially attributed to pilot error rather than command failures. Hayes's personal insecurities manifested most clearly in his interactions with female personnel, whom he viewed as inherent challenges to his authority rather than valuable contributors to mission accomplishment. His comments during staff meetings often included subtle disparagement of women's capabilities, couched in language that avoided overt discrimination while creating an atmosphere of hostility that drove several talented officers to seek assignments elsewhere. The promotion to colonel that brought Hayes to Nellis came despite a lackluster performance review that identified significant deficiencies in his leadership effectiveness and tactical understanding. His selection for the Air Operations Commander position resulted from careful lobbying by his political allies, who recognized that his continued advancement required placement in a role where his weaknesses might be less apparent and his failures could be attributed to external factors. From his first day at Nellis, Hayes established himself as a commander who ruled through intimidation rather than inspiration, using his position to settle perceived slights and demonstrate dominance over anyone he viewed as a potential threat to his authority. His staff meetings became forums for public humiliation of subordinates who dared to question his decisions or offer alternative suggestions, creating an environment where junior officers learned to remain silent rather than risk becoming targets of his volatile temper. Elena Rodriguez's presence at Nellis triggered Hayes's deepest insecurities, though he initially dismissed her as just another civilian contractor whose role posed no challenge to his position. Her quiet competence and professional demeanor should have made her invisible to someone of his rank and responsibilities, but Hayes possessed an instinct for identifying individuals whose capabilities might expose his own inadequacies, and something about Elena's bearing suggested depths that made him uncomfortable. The escalation began with small humiliations designed to establish dominance and remind Elena of her place in the base hierarchy. Hayes began assigning her tasks that fell far outside her job description, demanding that she personally deliver routine reports that should have been handled through normal administrative channels. These assignments came with pointed comments about civilian contractors who needed to understand their role in supporting military operations. Remarks that carried implications about her competence and value to the organization. Hayes's treatment of Elena became increasingly personal as he discovered that she never challenged his authority or responded to his provocations with the kind of emotional reactions that he used to justify further harassment. Her professional composure and quiet acceptance of his unreasonable demands only intensified his suspicion that she was somehow mocking his authority through her very refusal to acknowledge it as legitimate. During staff meetings that Elena attended to coordinate maintenance activities, Hayes began subjecting her to interrogations about her qualifications and background that exceeded any legitimate operational need. His questions about her previous experience in aviation came loaded with skepticism and condescension, delivered in tones that suggested he already knew her answers would prove inadequate. These performances were designed as much for the audience of uniformed personnel as for Elena herself, establishing Hayes as the protector of military standards against civilian incompetence. The psychological warfare intensified when Hayes discovered that Elena's maintenance coordination work required her presence in sensitive areas where operational planning occurred. He began questioning her security clearance status and suggesting that civilian contractors should not have access to information about flight operations, despite the fact that her work necessarily involved coordination with operational schedules and aircraft availability. His comments about people like her became increasingly frequent, loaded with implications about gender, ethnicity, and civilian status that he never made explicit but allowed to poison the atmosphere around Elena's work. Hayes's campaign against Elena expanded to include spreading rumors among base personnel about her qualifications and the circumstances of her hiring. He suggested that her position resulted from diversity initiatives rather than merit, planting seeds of doubt about her competence that took root among personnel who had no direct experience working with her. These whispers followed Elena through the base facilities, creating an atmosphere of suspicion that made her daily work increasingly difficult. The most insidious aspect of Hayes' harassment involved his manipulation of Elena's work assignments to create situations where failure seemed inevitable. He would assign her responsibility for coordinating complex maintenance schedules, while simultaneously restricting her access to the information necessary for effective planning. When problems inevitably arose, Hayes would publicly question her competence, while presenting himself as the voice of reason trying to manage the chaos created by civilian contractor incompetence. Hayes' behavior toward Elena became an open secret among base personnel, many of whom recognized the pattern of harassment but felt powerless to intervene due to his rank and the protection provided by his political connections. His treatment of other female personnel, while less intense than his campaign against Elena, followed similar patterns of professional undermining and personal humiliation that created a toxic environment throughout his command. The colonel's own operational failures became more apparent as his obsession with Elena consumed increasing amounts of his attention and energy. His tactical planning showed signs of the same poor judgment that had characterized his previous commands, but his subordinates had learned to avoid challenging his decisions directly, instead finding ways to work around his incompetence, while maintaining the appearance of compliance with his directives. As Hayes' harassment campaign intensified, Elena's response remained consistent with the persona she had constructed: professional acceptance of unreasonable treatment combined with quiet competence that made his criticisms appear increasingly petty and personal. Her refusal to be baited into confrontational responses only frustrated Hayes further, driving him toward increasingly desperate attempts to provoke the kind of emotional reaction that would justify his treatment of her in the eyes of his subordinates and superiors. The emergency that would shatter Elena's carefully constructed anonymity began with a routine training flight that should have been nothing more than another entry in the logbooks of experienced pilots. Captain Jake Morrison's solo proficiency flight in F-22 tail number 054087 was scheduled as a standard air-to-air combat training mission, designed to maintain the tactical edge that separates elite fighter pilots from merely competent ones. The Nevada desert below stretched endlessly under a crystal-clear October sky that provided perfect conditions for the high-altitude maneuvering that makes the Raptor the world's most capable air superiority fighter. The first indication of trouble came at 14:23 local time, when Morrison's routine check-in with Nellis Approach Control carried an unusual tension that experienced controllers immediately recognized as the voice of a pilot dealing with unexpected aircraft behavior. His initial report suggested minor hydraulic pressure fluctuations in his primary flight control system, the kind of intermittent problem that often resolves itself or remains manageable through established emergency procedures. Elena was reviewing maintenance schedules in the control tower's administrative area when Morrison's first transmission crackled through the radio speakers, but the professional tone and routine nature of the report didn't immediately capture her attention. Her focus remained on coordinating the complex ballet of aircraft inspections and parts deliveries that keep advanced fighter jets operational, work that required constant attention to detail but rarely involved life-or-death decision-making. Within minutes, however, Morrison's situation deteriorated from routine mechanical issue to full-blown emergency as his aircraft's hydraulic systems began failing in cascade fashion, each backup system succumbing to whatever mechanical gremlins had invaded his flight controls. His voice, still professionally calm but carrying increasingly urgent undertones, reported complete loss of primary hydraulic pressure followed by rapidly declining backup system performance. Colonel Hayes' response to the developing emergency revealed the fundamental incompetence that his political connections had successfully hidden throughout his career. His initial commands showed a dangerous misunderstanding of F-22 emergency procedures as he ordered Morrison to attempt maneuvers that would have been appropriate for older generation fighters but potentially catastrophic for a Raptor experiencing hydraulic failure. The sophisticated fly-by-wire system that makes the F-22 controllable under normal conditions becomes a liability when hydraulic power fails, requiring emergency procedures that Hayes had never properly mastered. The control room erupted in controlled chaos as personnel attempted to coordinate rescue operations while maintaining awareness of other aircraft in the area. Hayes' voice rose above the radio chatter, issuing contradictory orders that sent rescue helicopters toward incorrect coordinates while directing crash and rescue teams to prepare for emergencies at the wrong runway. His tactical confusion became apparent to everyone present as he struggled to manage multiple information sources while making decisions that revealed his fundamental misunderstanding of the situation. Elena found herself drawn into the crisis despite her civilian status, as Hayes demanded that all available personnel contribute to the emergency response. Her official role in maintenance coordination provided legitimate justification for her presence in the control room, but as she listened to the increasingly desperate radio transmissions, her professional training began asserting itself despite her efforts to remain in the background. Morrison's aircraft had become a complex engineering problem flying at 25,000 feet, with backup systems failing according to no predictable pattern in emergency procedures that assumed certain baseline hydraulic pressure no longer applicable to his situation. His attempts to follow Hayes's instructions resulted in increasingly unstable flight characteristics, as the colonel's commands forced the aircraft into configurations that its compromised systems couldn't maintain safely. The mathematical realities of Morrison's situation became apparent to Elena with the clarity that comes from years of experience managing similar emergencies. His fuel consumption had increased dramatically as he fought to control the aircraft, reducing his available flight time before forced ejection became the only option. The desert terrain below offered few suitable emergency landing sites, and his current flight path would take him over populated areas where an uncontrolled crash could result in civilian casualties. Elena's internal struggle intensified as she watched Hayes fumble through emergency checklists while issuing commands that demonstrated his lack of understanding about F-22 flight characteristics under degraded conditions. Her knowledge of the aircraft's systems, gained through years of flying and teaching others to fly the Raptor, made it painfully obvious that Morrison needed guidance from someone who understood the subtle interactions between hydraulic systems, flight computers, and aerodynamic forces that determine whether a pilot lives or dies in such situations. The moment of decision approached as Morrison's voice carried increasing strain, his professional composure beginning to crack under the pressure of flying an aircraft that no longer responded predictably to control inputs. His altitude was decreasing despite his efforts to maintain level flight, and his airspeed showed the erratic variations that indicated his flight control systems were fighting each other rather than working in harmony. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she gripped her clipboard, watching the radar display that showed Morrison's aircraft track becoming increasingly erratic. Every instinct developed through 15 years of military aviation screamed at her to intervene, to provide the guidance that could save Morrison's life, but doing so would shatter the anonymity that had protected her from the guilt and responsibility she had fled 3 years earlier. Hayes's latest command to Morrison revealed the depth of his incompetence, as he ordered a descent and approach that would have been suicidal given the aircraft's degraded condition. Elena watched in horror as Morrison acknowledged the order with the professional discipline that makes military pilots attempt even questionable commands from legitimate authority, despite his growing suspicion that something was fundamentally wrong with the guidance he was receiving. The technical aspects of Morrison's emergency became a cascade of interconnected failures that required understanding not just of individual aircraft systems, but of how those systems interacted under conditions that no training manual could adequately describe. His primary flight computers were attempting to maintain stable flight using hydraulic pressure that no longer existed, creating control responses that varied unpredictably based on aircraft attitude, airspeed, and power settings. Elena's expertise in F-22 systems integration made her perhaps the only person in the control room who fully understood the complexity of Morrison's situation and the precise sequence of actions required to give him the best chance of survival. Her knowledge of emergency procedures went beyond the standard checklists to include the kind of adaptive thinking that allows exceptional pilots to survive situations that would be fatal for others. The radio crackled with Morrison's increasingly desperate transmissions as he reported complete loss of normal flight control response, his aircraft now flying more like a barely controlled projectile than a precision fighter jet. His altitude continued to decrease despite maximum power settings, and his attempts to maintain wings-level flight required constant control inputs that were becoming less effective with each passing minute. Elena closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of decision that she had hoped never to face again. Morrison's life hung in the balance, dependent on receiving guidance from someone who understood the aircraft well enough to thread the needle between the multiple failure modes that were rapidly making his F-22 unflyable. Hayes's continued incompetence was leading Morrison towards certain death, while her intervention would expose everything she had worked to hide for the past 3 years. The sound of Morrison's labored breathing over the radio made the decision for her, as Elena realized that no personal consideration could justify standing by while a pilot died from receiving incompetent guidance. Her civilian contractor facade began to dissolve as she moved toward the communication station, preparing to break the silence that had protected her anonymity but condemned Morrison to death if she maintained it. Elena Rodriguez moved through the control room with the fluid precision of someone who had navigated similar crises countless times before, her civilian contractor demeanor evaporating like morning mist as she approached the auxiliary communications station. The transformation was so complete and sudden that several personnel stopped their activities to stare, sensing that something fundamental had shifted in the room's dynamics without understanding exactly what they were witnessing. Her voice, when it cut through the chaos of competing radio transmissions and overlapping conversations, carried an authority that seemed to emerge from nowhere and everywhere at once. The tentative, deferential tone that had characterized Elena's interactions for 3 years vanished, replaced by the calm certainty of someone accustomed to making life-or-death decisions under impossible pressure. "Falcon 2-7, this is Viper," she said, using her old call sign without conscious thought, her hand steady on the microphone as she established contact with Morrison's failing aircraft. The words carried across the control room like a physical force, stopping conversations and turning heads as personnel struggled to process what they had just heard. Morrison's response came through the static with a mixture of confusion and desperate hope. "Say again, Control, did you say Viper?" His voice carried the strain of a pilot fighting an aircraft that had become his enemy, but underneath the stress lay a note of recognition that suggested the call sign meant something to him beyond mere radio protocol. "Confirmed, Falcon 2-7, Viper is online. I need you to disregard all previous instructions and listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you." Elena's voice had become the steady anchor in a storm of confusion, her words carrying the kind of absolute confidence that allows pilots to trust instructions, even when they seem counterintuitive or impossible. The effect on the control room was immediate and profound. Colonel Hayes's face transformed from confusion to horror, as he began to understand that his authority had been usurped by someone whose competence made his own inadequacies glaringly apparent. Junior officers who had witnessed months of Elena's harassment suddenly found themselves re-evaluating everything they thought they knew about the quiet civilian contractor who had endured Hayes's abuse without complaint. Elena's tactical assessment of Morrison's situation unfolded with surgical precision as she walked him through emergency procedures that went far beyond standard checklists. Her understanding of F-22 systems integration allowed her to guide him through a complex sequence of power management, control surface configuration, and flight path adjustments that gradually restored some measure of controllability to his aircraft. "Falcon 2-7, I need you to reduce power to military setting and configure for minimum controllable airspeed," Elena instructed, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had talked dozens of pilots through similar emergencies. "Your flight computers are fighting each other because they're trying to maintain normal flight parameters with insufficient hydraulic pressure. We're going to work with what the aircraft wants to do rather than fighting it." Morrison's acknowledgement came with audible relief as he felt his aircraft's response improve following Elena's guidance. "Viper, that's helping. Aircraft is becoming more responsive. Who is this? Your voice sounds familiar." The question hung in the air like a revelation waiting to unfold, as Morrison's pilot instincts recognized something in Elena's communication style that triggered half-remembered training sessions and briefings. Major Lisa Anderson, who had been monitoring the emergency from the operational planning section, suddenly straightened as recognition dawned. Ghost Anderson had been one of Elena's squadron commanders during joint training exercises 2 years before Elena's resignation, and the tactical knowledge being demonstrated over the radio could only come from one source. Her whispered comment to the officer beside her, "That's Phoenix, that's Elena Rodriguez," spread through the control room like wildfire. Elena continued her guidance without acknowledging the growing awareness of her identity, her focus entirely concentrated on the complex task of bringing Morrison's aircraft to a safe landing. Her instructions became increasingly sophisticated as she guided him through energy management techniques that most pilots never learn outside of advanced test pilot schools, using her intimate knowledge of F-22 performance characteristics to thread the needle between too little energy to maintain control and too much energy to land safely. "Falcon 2-7, we're going to execute a modified straight-in approach to runway 03, Elena continued, her tactical planning evident in every instruction. Your aircraft's behavior will become increasingly unpredictable below 200 knots, so we need to maintain energy until the final approach phase. Flaps and gear will create additional control challenges, so we'll configure late and accept a higher-than-normal approach speed." The gathered personnel watched in fascination, as Elena orchestrated not just Morrison's emergency procedures, but also the coordination of ground support assets with the efficiency of someone who had managed similar operations from positions of authority. Her directions to crash and rescue teams, medical personnel, and fire suppression units revealed a comprehensive understanding of emergency response protocols that extended far beyond her maintenance coordination role. Hayes's attempts to reassert control over the situation fell on deaf ears, as personnel throughout the control room began responding to Elena's authority rather than his rank. His commands, when he managed to issue them, were quietly ignored or redirected by subordinates, who had recognized that they were witnessing expertise that their official commander simply did not possess. Lieutenant Colonel David Martinez, monitoring the situation from the base operations center, confirmed what many had suspected. Reaper Martinez had served under Elena's command during her squadron leadership days, and recognized not just her voice but her tactical methodology and crisis management style. His radio transmission to the control room carried the weight of personal testimony. "This is Reaper. I can confirm that's Colonel Elena Rodriguez, former commander of the 94th Fighter Squadron. She's probably the best F-22 pilot the Air Force ever produced." Elena's response to this revelation was characteristically focused on the mission rather than personal recognition. "Reaper, good to hear your voice. We'll catch up later. Right now, let's get Falcon 2-7 on the ground safely." Her ability to maintain tactical focus while managing the personal implications of her exposure demonstrated the leadership qualities that had made her legendary among those who had served with her. Morrison's approach to Nellis Runway 03 became a masterclass in emergency aircraft handling as Elena guided him through each phase of the increasingly complex landing sequence. Her instructions anticipated problems before they developed, providing solutions to control challenges that Morrison wouldn't have recognized until it was too late to respond effectively. "Falcon 2-7, you're going to experience significant control buffeting when you configure landing gear. Don't fight it. Let the aircraft settle into its new trim condition, then make small corrections. Your touchdown will be firm, but the aircraft will stay controllable if you don't overcorrect." Elena's guidance revealed the kind of practical wisdom that comes from years of flying complex aircraft under all possible conditions. The landing itself unfolded exactly as Elena had predicted, with Morrison's F-22 touching down hard but safely on Nellis Runway 03, the aircraft's compromised systems finally allowing it to settle onto solid ground after nearly 40 minutes of aerial crisis management. The collective exhale of relief from everyone in the control room was audible, followed immediately by spontaneous applause that recognized not just Morrison's survival, but the exceptional guidance that had made it possible. Elena set down her microphone and turned to leave the control room, her mission complete and her cover irrevocably blown. But Colonel Hayes's voice stopped her at the door, his tone carrying a mixture of rage and desperation as he attempted to reassert authority that had been completely undermined by her demonstration of competence. You don't have authority to take control of my operations. This is my command, and I don't care what your background is. You're a civilian contractor who just interfered with official Air Force procedures." Hayes's words rang hollow in a room full of people who had just witnessed the difference between authentic expertise and hollow authority. Elena's response came without turning around, her voice carrying the quiet dignity that had characterized her service throughout her military career. "Colonel Hayes, I suggest you review the emergency authority provisions in Air Force Instruction 11-202. Any qualified person may assume control of aircraft operations when life safety is at stake, and current leadership is demonstrably inadequate." Her words carried no malice, just the statement of regulatory fact that everyone present recognized as accurate. The aftermath of Morrison's successful emergency landing began immediately, as base personnel who had witnessed Elena's performance began sharing the story with colleagues throughout Nellis. The tale of the quiet civilian contractor who had revealed herself to be one of the Air Force's most legendary fighter pilots spread through the base community like wildfire, fundamentally altering how everyone viewed both Elena's previous treatment and Hayes's fitness for command. The transformation at Nellis Air Force Base began within hours of Captain Morrison's successful emergency landing, as word of Elena Rodriguez's revelation spread through the military aviation community with the speed of modern communication networks. Base personnel who had witnessed her expert handling of the crisis became unofficial ambassadors for a story that challenged everything they thought they understood about authority, competence, and the true nature of military leadership. Major General Patricia Wells, commander of the 57th Wing at Nellis, arrived at the base within 6 hours of receiving the initial reports about the emergency. Her reputation as one of the Air Force's most forward-thinking leaders had been built on a career-long commitment to recognizing and developing talent regardless of the political complications such recognition might create. The preliminary briefing she received painted a picture of extraordinary competence hidden beneath deliberate anonymity, combined with systematic harassment by a commander whose own inadequacies had been exposed in the most public way possible. Elena's first formal meeting with General Wells took place in the Wing Commander's office, a space that reflected the General's no-nonsense approach to military leadership through its functional design and complete absence of the ego displays that characterized many senior officers' workspaces. Elena entered the office wearing the same civilian clothes that had been her uniform for 3 years, but her bearing had subtly shifted from the self-effacing posture of a maintenance coordinator to something that suggested her true background without quite returning to full military deportment. "Ms. Rodriguez," General Wells began, acknowledging Elena's civilian status while her tone conveyed deep respect, "I've spent the morning reviewing your service record and talking to people who served with you. What I've learned suggests that the Air Force lost one of its most capable officers when you resigned, and I'd like to understand what happened and how we can move forward." Elena's response revealed the depth of guilt and self-doubt that had driven her into hiding 3 years earlier. Her account of Operation Distant Thunder and Captain Thompson's death carried the weight of someone who had replayed every decision countless times, searching for alternatives that might have prevented the tragedy. Her explanation of why she chose exile over continued service demonstrated the kind of moral responsibility that the Air Force desperately needed, even as it had driven away one of its most talented officers. General Wells listened without interruption, her experienced ear recognizing the voice of someone whose standards for personal accountability exceeded even the demanding requirements of military service. When Elena finished her account, the general's response carried both understanding and challenge. "Elena, I've read the investigation reports from your final mission. What happened to Captain Thompson was a tragedy, but it wasn't your failure. The question now is whether you're going to let guilt over an unpredictable accident continue to deprive young pilots of the training and leadership they need to survive similar situations." The offer that followed surprised Elena in its simplicity and respect for her current status. General Wells proposed creating a civilian instructor position that would allow Elena to develop advanced emergency procedures training without requiring her return to military service. The role would give her complete autonomy to design curricula that could prevent future tragedies, while allowing her to maintain the distance from military hierarchy that she seemed to need for her emotional well-being. "You saved Captain Morrison's life today," General Wells continued, "not because of your rank or your position, but because of your knowledge and your willingness to act when it mattered. That's exactly what we need in someone who trains our next generation of pilots." Elena's hesitation reflected not lack of interest, but the psychological challenge of accepting that her expertise could serve a greater purpose than her personal atonement. Her 3 years of self-imposed exile had been simultaneously punishment and refuge, allowing her to remain close to aviation while avoiding the weight of command that she associated with her perceived failure. The decision crystallized during her visit to the base medical facility to check on Captain Morrison's condition following his harrowing emergency landing. Morrison, bruised but otherwise uninjured, recognized her immediately, despite never having met her during her active duty career. His first words captured the essence of what Elena's guidance had meant. "Ma'am, I don't know your full story, but your voice in my headset was the difference between going home to my family and becoming a statistic." "Thank you." Elena's response to Morrison revealed the beginning of her psychological healing, as she recognized that her expertise could serve purposes beyond her own guilt and self-recrimination. "Captain, I'm just glad you're safe. That's what matters." Her words carried a simplicity that masked their significance, the first indication that she was beginning to separate her value as an instructor from her feelings about past tragedies. The quiet removal of Colonel Hayes from his position occurred with minimal fanfare, as General Wells prioritized restoring effective leadership over creating public spectacles. Hayes's reassignment to a Pentagon administrative role effectively ended his operational career, while his replacement, a competent officer with genuine respect for subordinates, immediately began rebuilding the toxic culture that Hayes had created. Elena's decision to accept the civilian instructor position came after a week of reflection that included conversations with former squadron mates, who helped her understand that her withdrawal from military life had been necessary for her healing, but that her continued exile served no one's interests, including her own. Major Anderson's visit proved particularly influential, as Ghost shared her perspective that honoring fallen comrades sometimes meant continuing the mission they had died serving. The announcement of Elena's new role created positive ripples throughout the fighter pilot community, where her tactical innovations and training methods had influenced an entire generation of aviators. Young pilots who had heard whispered stories about Viper Rodriguez suddenly found themselves with the opportunity to learn from someone whose emergency procedures knowledge had been proven under the most extreme circumstances. Elena's first official act in her new position involved establishing training protocols designed to prevent the kind of emergency that had nearly killed Captain Morrison. Her analysis of the incident revealed systematic gaps in how pilots were prepared for cascading system failures, leading to the development of simulator scenarios that pushed aviators beyond their comfort zones while providing the safety margins necessary for effective learning. The pilot training evolution that Elena initiated at Nellis proved its effectiveness quickly, as pilots who completed her emergency procedures course demonstrated significantly improved performance during unexpected aircraft malfunctions. Her approach emphasized understanding aircraft systems deeply enough to improvise solutions when standard procedures proved inadequate, preparing pilots for the reality that emergencies rarely unfold exactly as training scenarios predict. Elena's personal accommodation to her new role reflected thoughtful balance between her need for emotional distance and her commitment to effective instruction. She maintained her modest base housing and civilian status while accepting the professional recognition that her expertise deserved. Her office became a resource center focused on emergency procedures development rather than personal advancement, decorated with photos of successful training graduates rather than awards or commendations. Captain Morrison's complete recovery became a symbol of the positive change that Elena's courage had initiated. His survival story spread through the aviation community as proof that exceptional guidance could overcome seemingly impossible circumstances, while his continued service carried forward the lessons learned during those terrifying minutes when Elena's voice had been his lifeline. The cultural transformation at Nellis extended beyond emergency procedures training, as Elena's example challenged assumptions about where true competence resides within military organizations. Young officers began recognizing that the most capable people in any unit might not be those with the highest ranks or most visible positions, leading to better utilization of available expertise and more inclusive approaches to problem solving. Elena's story became a quiet legend within the Air Force, shared among pilots as an example of how personal tragedy could be transformed into service that saves other lives. Her willingness to break her silence when Captain Morrison's life hung in the balance demonstrated that true courage often means acting despite personal cost, and that the most meaningful contributions to military readiness often require personal sacrifice. The lasting impact of Elena's transformation measured itself not in medals or promotions, but in the accident rates that decreased, and the emergency response capabilities that improved across units implementing her training innovations. Her methods produced aviators who combined technical proficiency with adaptive thinking, creating a generation of pilots better prepared for the unpredictable challenges that define modern military aviation. In quiet moments, Elena sometimes visited the base memorial that honored fallen pilots, including Captain Thompson's name among those who had paid the ultimate price for their service. Her healing had come through accepting that the best way to honor his memory was not through continued self-punishment, but through ensuring that future pilots possessed the knowledge and skills that might save their lives when the unthinkable happened. The woman who had been supposed to stay silent had found her voice again, not through returning to her former glory, but through discovering that sometimes the most important service happens when we choose to help others despite our own pain. Elena Rodriguez had learned that healing doesn't always mean forgetting the past, but sometimes means transforming tragedy into something that serves a greater purpose. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.